Hello everyone, Gerald here again. I just thought I'd put together this video to share with you how one can use Photoshop, a feature in Photoshop to make targeted selections within an image based on color range. Now, I've incorporate this a lot into my workflow. I think it's a fantastic way of, as I say, being able to do that. It differs from things like luminosity masking because, as I say, what this is going to do is make targeted selections based on color and not brightness levels within an image like luminosity masks do. Now, just in terms of what I've got up here, I've got my layers up, I've got my properties up, I've got my adjustments to add adjustment layers. I have my actions panel up. Now, just in case this looks slightly different to the way you may see your actions panel, I've actually got mine in button mode as opposed to list mode. So if I just highlight on that tick mark, it'll change it back to list mode. But I've got hundreds of actions, so I don't want to be going scrolling around through that all night for you. And so I'm going to switch that over to button mode, and obviously these are my channels. So this actually isn't particularly well known universally, I think, of it, amongst a lot of Photoshop users, which is not actually surprising, since it's kind of like hidden away a little bit under select. Now, I'm going to go up under select and I'm going to come down to color range, and it's going to reveal this dialog box. So let me just briefly go through what we're looking at here. This is the way that you can actually make selections. You can either do it manually through sampled colors, which is what it's showing here now. Now, in order to do that, what you would then do is come down to these eyedropper tools. You'd select an eyedropper tool and you would just click on a color you wanted to make a selection from. So I wanted to target these kind of like golden yellows in this shot. This is a shot of a waterfall that I took a while back in autumn, not surprisingly, given the color hues here. Now, there are a couple of check boxes here. One was detect faces. Well, we don't have to worry about that because we haven't got any faces in here. And we have another checkbox here called localize color clusters, which I tend to always have checked because it does help to constrain that selection a little bit more. And there are a couple of sliders here. This is the first one is the fuzziness. Now, what this is basically, it almost kind of acts like a brightness and darkness slider, in as much it's going to make more of that selection present, or it's going to kind of constrain it and darken it down a bit, so not so much of that selection is going to then be selected when we click OK. I usually have it around about 90%, but again, you can change that based on what your own preference is. And again, range, that's kind of like, it's almost like an opacity slider or for a layer. Again, it's kind of constrain or increase the amount of selection that's going on there. Now, you have a bunch of selection previews in terms of how you can actually view this. I've got it set to none. I always usually have it set to none. You can either have it set to grayscale, so it actually shows up in the on the main stage. You can have it as a black matte, which or a white matte. And again, that's kind of interesting. That's kind of showing you, what actually is being selected here, and so the degree and amount of how much is being selected. Or you can have it just as a quick mask. But I usually have it just set to none, so I can see this and I can ascertain what's going on here in the dialog box here. Now, let's just say that I do want to add some more of this green to this selection. Then what I would do is I would just come to this second eyedropper and click on that with the plus tool, and that will allow me to add that to the selection, and I can keep clicking if I want to add more of that. So yeah, there you go. Now, if I've gone too far and that's too much of a selection, I then just come to the final eyedropper on the right here with the minus sign, which will then extract and delete and remove that selection, or any other places that you click on if you want to constrain that a little bit more. Right, so let's just say, for argument's sake, this is good and I want to accept this. All I need to do now is just go OK. And Photoshop is going to make that selection for me, as you can see here. Well, maybe you can't, but you've got the infamous marching ants are up, indicating that the selection has been made. Now, you can do one of two things at this juncture. You can either go straight to adding an adjustment layer, or what I usually tend to do and would always recommend is I will now save this as a channel. So I'm going to come over to my channels panel here. I'm now going to come down to the bottom to the icon, the rectangular icon with a circle in it, which is save selection as channel, and that's what I've done. Now click on that and you can see what's happened is that selection has now been saved as a channel. Now I'm just going to press Command or Control D to deselect, and it has saved this channel now as Alpha 1. Now I want to change that over and rename that to yellows. Now what I can now do is, with this saved as a channel, if I Control or Command click on it, I can reselect this and then go to adding an adjustment layer, and I'm just going to add a color balance adjustment layer, and when I do, it adds an adjustment layer with a mask from that selection, which is terrific. Now what I'll also note, you'll notice that the eyeball, if you go back to the background, you may find if this, you're seeing this red, it just means that the mask is turned on in the channel. You just need to click off of its eyeball. Now what we have here is, as I say, a highly detailed mask base of that selection that we can now go and make changes to whatever we want. So let's say, for example, I want to just boost the saturation or the color hue of these leaves down in the foreground with the color balance tool. I'm just going to whack over, really pump the yellow there. I'm going to go very much over the top so you can actually start seeing things. There's no point in me being overly subtle and you're just going to sit there going, what's going on? So I'm going to really boost the yellow, and I'm just going to throw in quite a bit of red there as well to just make that a little bit more orange, a little bit warmer. I'm just Option click, and what that mask is doing a great job of just confining the adjustment to this particular selection. So once I have this instantiated, I can obviously, if it's running too hot, I can just change the opacity of that layer mask just to dial it back a bit, to my heart's content. And let me just toggle that on and off so you can see the difference. So that was it without toggled off, and that's it with the adjustment in place. Now that is making selections kind of manually. How I tend to use this, let me just delete this adjustment layer. How I tend to use this is I'm going to go back up under, bring color range up, and if we bring down this drop down menu, you can see you can actually select it by the colors within the image: red, yellow, green, cyans, blues, magentas. So let's say, for example, I do want to select the yellows. I will let it go again, and it's going to search and analyze that image, and it's going to select all the yellows. I will go OK, and it has made that selection. It's kind of faint because, as I say, it's actually going to be quite constrained based on the color density within this image. And I'm just going to do the same thing. I'm just going to come down and save it as a channel. It's going to save as Alpha 1. I'm going to click on it, and I'm going to go Command or Control D to deselect. Now, as you can see here, this is actually going to be, if we were to use this as a mask, this is actually going to be a pretty constrained mask, in as much as it's going to constrain any adjustments quite a lot coming through here. Now, if I want to make this more contrasty in terms of making it more black and white, here's what I would do. So I don't do this destructively. I will just grab and make a copy of that particular channel, and with this now selected, I will go up under Image, come down to Adjustments, and I will just go to Levels, or I could have done Control or Command L. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull and crank the midtones up, and I really pull over the white point as well. May even just bring the black point down just to really darken down those blacks. Go OK, and this is now going to be, if I was to make a mask from this would be a much more contrasty mask, so any adjustments that would be made through this mask would show through a lot better than something that's going to be a lot more subtle, which is this one. Right, so let me just shift click on these two and again show you how I approach. Let's just get rid of those. Right. And let's just delete this so we just kind of, right. So this problem, potential problem with, again, depending on what stage of your post-production you're at, maybe, I mean, if this is kind of like right from camera raw, there's been no kind of real adjustments made to it. Some of the colors could actually be quite subtle. So what I would do in this situation, and this is what I do, I actually add a hue saturation adjustment layer, and I really crank the colors up. Now, apart from that looking like a great Yes album cover, I mean, obviously what it is, it's really saturating the colors, so they're obviously very, very strong within the confines of this image. Now, what I am also, you will obviously, it has gone very, very electric. There's a lot of solarization going on here. There's a lot of noise now being generated in this. So it may be that you just want to kind of like dial it back to a point where it's kind of pretty prevalent, but not going too haywire. Now, with this hue saturation layer instantiated, I'm now going to click back on this background layer. In order for color range to work, you do actually have to make sure that the image layer is selected. I'm going to come up under select, color range, and I'm actually going to like see if it can find the reds, and I'm going to select OK. It's now made a selection. I'm now going to save that as a channel, and it's going to save it as alpha 1, and that is my red selection, and then I would just name that reds. Now what I've found is really, really, really beneficial is to have all these channels for all the colors, the red, the blue, the green, the cyan, and the magenta. But you know, to do that, you know, one after the other can get a little bit monotonous. So let me just delete this. What I have actually done is I have created some custom actions that will do it all for us. Basically, this is going to do exactly what I just did, but it's going to do it over and over again to make sure and select all the color range within this given image. Now, it's up here in my actions panel, and it is select color range. Now, I'm just going to click this, and the first part of the action will stop because the first part of the action is the addition of the hue saturation layer. And it's set to 100%, so it's really dialed up, and it stops there because then that will then allow me or any user to be able to dial that back to their heart's content. But I'm just going to leave it at full strength now so we can see. So I'm going to accept that, I'm going to click OK, and now it's going to run, and what it's going to do, hopefully, create, and it finishes off by deleting the hue saturation layer adjustment layer. And what it's done, it's gone through and it's created all the color ranges. There's the reds, there's the yellows, there's the greens, there's the cyans, there's the blues, and there's the magentas. And from these now I can make masks to be used in conjunction with any of the adjustment layers. Control or Command click on the yellows channel there to make a selection, and I am going to add a color balance adjustment layer, and I'm going to turn off the mask in the channel panel and come down to its properties, and I'm going to crank the yellows. Now you can see what's probably happening here is it's doing a great job, but if I was to option click on this layer mask, there are areas down here that it's throwing up that I do not want to be affected by this particular adjustment layer. So let me say, as you can probably see here, there's this kind of like horrible yellow ghosting down here. So what I could do is, if I was to option click on this, I could obviously conceivably get my brush, make sure my foreground set to black, my opacity 100, and I could just paint black on top of that in order to hide anything in here that I don't want to have showing through that mask. So let's just go back here. Yeah, and then that's great. It's removed it, and it's certainly knocked back the saturation here. However, if I then decided that was a mistake, or I actually did want some of that coloration back in there, if I was to option click on the mask again and set my foreground to white in the brush, you can see what's happened. I have destroyed that mask in terms of the detailing of what was under here prior to painting black on it. So let me just undo all that, so we're back to square one. You probably are thinking, well, can't you just add another, mask to the mask? Well, you can add a mask, but it will come in as a vector mask, not a layer mask. Vector masks behave differently to layer masks. So in this situation, what I would then resort to is what I call group masking. Now, group masking is a nifty way of getting around this issue with making adjustments to the mask that are non-destructive. So what I'm going to do is I am now going to put this layer into a group, and there's a couple of ways that you can do that. You can select it. You can come down to the little group folder icon here. The folder icon here denotes that is now going to be put into a group. And before you click on it, just hold down the Shift key, and that will then put this layer into this group on its own. And there's this little disclosure triangle that you can just twiddle just to show and hide it. But let me just undo that, because I think the simpler and quickest way is to select that layer and just go Command or Control G. And that does the exact same thing. And this is now siloed in this group. And what you can now do, you can actually turn it off via the group, via the eyeball next to the actual group. Now that we have this in this state, all I'd need to do now would be to add a mask to this group folder. And what I would do is Option Alt click on Add Layer Mask icon, and that's immediately going to add a black mask, which is going to completely conceal any of these adjustments from this adjustment layer within it. Now, in order to bring back any of that color saturation that I want in targeted areas, all I need to do is to have my brush foreground set to white, opacity 100, and then just paint on that group folder mask. And that white is going to allow this adjustment to show through on the main stage. And exact same thing, I can also, if that's coming too hot, I could just dial it back with the opacity. Now, let me just Option Alt delete that to take that back. Alternatively, what I could have done, I could have kept that as a white mask, and instead of painting white on black, I could have just painted black on white, and that would then hide anything that I didn't want showing through from that adjustment layer. So maybe change my brush opacity to 40% by tapping my 4 numeral key. If I just wanted to ghost that back, so it doesn't remove it altogether, but you kind of get a sense of depth with this being brighter in the foreground and just receding slightly into the background area like that. So just toggle that on and off so you can see the before and after. And I'll just Option click on this layer mask, and you can see what I've been doing in terms of the painting on top of it. Now, once again, let me just delete that so it goes back to its black state. I was able to paint pretty loosey-goosey onto this layer mask. Didn't really matter where I painted in order to reveal this color. Let me just take that back to 100, because the constraint is being made by this layer mask here. So I can pretty much paint outside the lines quite willy-nilly actually, but as I say, so that the mask here will be constraining how much of that adjustment will be showing through. Now, conceivably, these selections don't have to be made just for color adjustment. They could be used for any other parameter or change you may want to instigate via the addition of a adjustment layer. So let's say, for example, I just want to make these leaves in the background here just pop a little bit more. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just review. It definitely looks like the yellows. It'll be a yellow. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to Control click on that to make a selection. I'm now going to come up to and add a levels adjustment there. Switch off its mask, and what you can see is that now we have a levels adjustment layer with that yellow's mask attached to it. Now what I can do here is I can either go in and change the parameters of this levels adjustment by pulling up the white point or the midpoint, or what I could simply need to do, let me just take that back to 1, I could actually just change this layer's blending mode over to screen, which will brighten everything, and we can go through the same process. This obviously is affecting way too much, and I don't want these foreground leaves to be affected. But what I can now do is go through the exercise of group masking again by Command G, putting that into a group. I'm going to option click on the add layer mask to add a black mask that will conceal the adjustment, painting directly on this group layer mask. I will probably have an opacity of around, let's start with 40 by opacity of 40% by tapping my number 4 key. I'm just going to start tapping on these areas. Just toggle that on and off. So again, a very, very targeted adjustment can be made by group masking from something like a layers level adjustment with a mask derived from one of these color channels. Now, going back to what I was saying in regards to, depending on how aggressive or saturated you make the hue adjustment level when one goes to run select by color range to separate out the different colors within the image automatically, the mask that it can produce could possibly be a little bit grainy and have quite a little bit of noise in them, as I say, because of the aggressiveness or the strength of that hue saturation there. Now, one way you can offset that is that when you go to apply the selection to a mask, like in this situation again here where I use the yellow selection to make a color balance adjustment level, I've made the enhancements to the color by boosting the yellow, adding a touch of red to bring out this kind of more orange glow. If I just option click on this mask, what you can do to minimize that is to actually come down to the mask properties and introduce a degree of feathering that will help to smooth that color transition into the image itself, so it's not so quite a hard blend there. As I say, by increasing the amount of feathering, you can greatly smooth that color transition within the image itself. Let me just toggle this on and off. This is the group mask. As you can see, you can still see that color adjustment coming through nicely, but it's probably blending in a lot more smooth owing to the fact that I've added quite a degree of feathering to the mask itself. And you can experiment with that on your own by just how much feathering or you dial in. And the more you tend to dial in, the more constrained and localized that color adjustment becomes, which actually could be quite a good thing. So in order to wrap up, as I said, what I'd actually done with this here old color range would be I actually created, as I say, a custom set of actions that I am actually going to put a link to in the show notes of this video, that if you want these actions and you feel that they could be of use to you, just go and get them. There are two sets. There's two sets in it. There's the select color range, which I will just show you again. Watch otherwise though, if you are to run these custom actions, if you want to download them, you have to have the layer that's being targeted named as background. If you've unlocked this at some point and it's gone to layer 0, 1 or whatever it is going, and you go to try and run these actions, it'll stop because it'll say it can't find background layer. So if you do have this named as anything else, just either duplicate it and rename it backgrounds in order to be able to run these actions, which I'll do again just to remind us. Hit them, it'll throw up the hue saturation layer. You can dial this back to whatever intensity you want. Just press OK, then this will go through and generate all the channels based on the colors in the image, namely the reds, yellows, greens, cyans and magentas. As part of the set, there's also a button, a very quick action that will actually delete all of these channels, because again, just something you might want to keep your eye on as you're adding these channels. It is going to quite significantly increase your file size, because these channels contain nearly as much information as the actual image itself. So as I say, if you're finding that you're kind of maxing out on headroom, then just hit the delete color range action and it will delete all those. Now, depending on what you're developing your image for, whether it's actually just for the web or it's for print, there's another great feature in the select color range, which is to be able to select out of gamut colors. And what that's going to do is obviously identify and make a selection based on all the colors that are either too saturated and are out of gamut. So I'm just going to click OK on that. It's going to make it selections, and not surprisingly, it looks like it's all the yellows, because obviously I kind of went a little bit mad in order to be able to show you how you can make color adjustments. So what I'm going to do is I'm now going to save that as a channel. I'm going to Command D, deselect it. I'm going to call this out of gamut. And now that this is a channel, I can make a selection from it by Command or Control clicking on it, and however then you want to make your color adjustments. If you just want to add a hue saturation adjustment layer, so with the hue saturation layer, I mean, you could just maybe just dial back a little bit on the overall global saturation, or you could just use this drop down panel here to just target the yellows and reduce the saturation of those, not to make, on the yellows, just to make sure they're not running too hot. Or alternatively, let me just hide that and just make another selection. Command click on that, and you might just want to do that via a vibrancy adjustment layer. Just turn that off, and you just may want to bring down the vibrance or the color saturation to bring it into gamut, so you shouldn't have any problems if you're going to be then sending this out to a lab or your printer in order to get a hard copy done. I mean, obviously this is not such a worry if you're just uploading to the web, because I think we know the sky's the limit in terms of oversaturation for images that go on the web. But anyway, this could be a really useful thing to have, as I say, if you are going to print. So let me just turn that off, because there was one other final thing that you may want to look at. We can take a quick look at in terms of color range. Again, just want to make sure that that background layer is selected, otherwise color range will not work on any other layer. Go to color range, and last but no means least, there are these three other parameters here where you can select via the highlights in the image, get the midtones in the image, or the shadows in the image. There's kind of a lot of shadow in here, so let me just click OK, and this is going to make a selection based on what it perceives to be the shadows. So I'll just save that as a channel, and that's the selection based on shadows. Let's just click back on this, why not? Hopefully you've not fallen asleep yet. Let's go to midtones, select the midtones, save that as a channel, deselect, and again, you just click on this and you can make a selection and throw on whatever adjustment layer you want. So here's a levels adjustment layer, just turn that off in there. And last but no means least, let's just make a selection based color range based off of selection of the highlights. So it'll make its selection, marching answer up. Let's come down and save it as a channel. Click on it, deselect, and there's our channel based off of the highlights in this image as found by the color range feature. So anyway, I hope that's given you some ideas on how color range can be used in a number of different ways, not only just to make color changes, but also can be used for any other parameter or change you may want to make to an image by saving the color channels or the color selections as channels and then creating masks from those channels. So as I say, if you think this is of use to you, look down in the show notes. There will be a link to these custom actions that you can then just load into your actions panel and then run as necessary to generate these color selections. So hope you've enjoyed it. Hope it's been of use. Thanks for watching, and I'll catch you on the next go round.